In lieu of a text from the Bible today, I want to offer you a different kind of text in the form of something I heard everywhere I went in New Zealand and Australia in the past 3 weeks from both pastors and lay people who gather in what are called uniting churches down under. In every single venue where I was invited to speak, something like this was said as a part of the welcome to all. This particular version came from Margaret Mayman, pastor of Pitt Street Uniting Church in Sydney. We offer you a warm welcome, remembering that the land on which we meet is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land in this place. And I also pay respect to Gadigal elders past and present, and extend that same respect to any Aboriginal people who are with us here today. Well, the first time I heard that, I thought, that is really nice. The second time, a coincidence perhaps, then the third, fourth, and fifth time, I realized it was a kind of sacred agreement that all the uniting churches had made to acknowledge something we so easily forget, that we are not the first people to have lived in the lands where we now live and worship, and to forget this is to forget that we are colonizers who have sinned against indigenous people. I was so moved by this that I promised my new friends down under that I would carry it back with me to Mayflower and give it a try. So here goes. We offer you a warm welcome this morning, remembering that the land on which we meet is, was, and always will be American Indian land. I acknowledge those indigenous tribes to Oklahoma, the Wichitas, Caddos, Plains Apaches, and the Quapaws, as the original custodians of the land in this place. And I pay respect to those driven from their land by the Indian Removal Act of 1830 across the Trail of Tears, the Choctaw, Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole people. I offer respect to all tribal elders, past and present, and extend that same respect to any American Indians who may be with us here today. Here ends this long overdue apology, inspired by God. May God grant to us wisdom and courage to remember and to be humble. Sean and I have returned from the trip of a lifetime, a week in New Zealand and 4 days each in the Australian cities of Melbourne, Perth, Sydney, and Brisbane, at the invitation of an organization down under called Common Dreams. Every 3 years, a scholar in the progressive Christian tradition gets invited to be the Common Dreams on the Road lecturer. The events are held in what are called uniting churches of New Zealand and Australia. They are a combination of Methodist, Presbyterian, and Congregational churches in a land where the Anglican and Catholic Church dominate the landscape, and the culture is increasingly secular, especially for those under 30. Last year, after speaking at Marcus Borg's memorial service in California, a woman asked me if I would like to be the lecturer for this year and bring Sean along. I said, well, give me 5.5 seconds to think about it. We left for Los Angeles on May 3rd, and the trip started on a kind of happy family note. As we taxied to the runway, the pilot came on the intercom to make his usual announcements and then finished by saying, we offer a special welcome today to Sean and Robin Meyers on their way to Australia from your son, Blue. And unbeknownst to us, Blue, who is a pilot, was at that moment taxiing his plane on another runway at Will Rogers, about to take off, and was chatting with our pilot about his crazy parents. We flew from Los Angeles to Auckland on New Zealand Air, and to be honest, It was the first time that Sean or I had either one of us flown business class across the ocean. So we settled into those personal pods with the music and the movies and the hot towels and the fine wine and a seat that transforms magically into a bed. This will spoil you. And I must confess, I got up once to go to the bathroom and the stewardess asked me a question I've never been asked on an airplane before. While you were gone, she said, "Would you like for me to make up your bed?" I thought, sure, why not? I looked over at Sean and proposed a toast. Here's to working for Jesus. Yeah. We arrived in Auckland 13 hours later and took a regional plane down to a little coastal town called Napier. And out the window, I saw the most beautiful country I've ever seen. Australia was amazing, but New Zealand is magical. And we didn't even make it to the South Island where Lord of the Rings was filmed. Those Kiwis are amazing people. They all know Stephen Adams, who hails from New Zealand, and so they know about the thunder and they're grieving with us. But they know his sister even better, Valerie Adams, a double Olympic gold medalist and 4-time world shot putting champion. It's a big, strong family, those Adams. Napier was destroyed by an earthquake in 1931 and was rebuilt at the height of the Art Deco period. It's now the Art Deco capital of the world. It was there that we were hosted by the first group of amazing people who organized these mini conferences on progressive Christianity with support from renegade clergy and dedicated laypersons. These are curious adults who read and study books in Sunday school that are not always approved by the church hierarchy. Books like Saving Jesus from the Church. And then they set about to host their own events and to invite the authors they've read to come visit and lecture. And then they make up their own minds, can you believe it, about what they think Christianity is really all about. I can tell you that although we saw some amazing and beautiful places on this trip, we met even more amazing and beautiful people. Some of them were ex-nuns who were in exile from the Catholic Church. Some were parents of gay children who cannot countenance the church's continued condemnation. They are renegade clergy who've had it with bishops trying to protect people from new ideas or stop preachers from telling people what they really learned in seminary. These people are like leaven in the loaf of the church empire down under. One local Methodist clergy decided to write a letter to the editor that appeared while we were still in town to complain about this American heretic, Robin Meyers, who had been invited to spread his radical ideas about Christianity in New Zealand. He believes nothing that constitutes Orthodox Christianity, the letter went on, and he should never have been invited. One of my new friends answered the letter by saying, "That's exactly why we invited him." And neither he nor his lovely wife, Sean, seem like particularly scary people. On our first Friday evening, I gave a lecture called From Galilean Sage to Supernatural Savior, or How I Became a Heretic with Help from Jesus. In it, as you can guess, I make the case that Christianity is a way of life, not a set of creeds and doctrines demanding total agreement. And I talked a lot about Mayflower and the strange and wonderful place I live in, the state whose name means red man and is also the reddest of the red states. And it did not take long for someone to ask about Donald Trump. Everywhere I went, it was the first question people ask: what on earth is happening in American politics? And then they said, "We are frightened." And I said, "So are we." We ate together and we worshiped together, and the conversations we had were rich and deep. Much of the mission work of the Uniting Churches is inspiring, and the feistiness of the people was contagious. They're candid about their own colonial past and the shameful treatment of indigenous people. New Zealanders have a better record of integrating the Maori people into their culture as equals, but in Australia, the Aboriginal people were officially referred to as flora and fauna until 1967. That's right, they were not people. They were a non-human part of the landscape. Meanwhile, I taught the Kiwis to say our benediction, ending with every single other. The minister of St. Paul's Presbyterian Church in Napier, a woman named Sally Carter, where I preached the first Sunday, taught it to her congregation during the worship service. I'm not kidding you. She said our Mayflower benediction and then had the congregation practice. When I say love one another, she said, you respond every single other. I sat there on the other side of the world and thought about how you guys would love this. I wanted to take out my cell phone and film it, but that would be rude. They had given me a way to begin worship with this apology, and I had given them a way to end it. And in that moment, we were joined by the welcoming spirit that is the church at its best, no matter where you go. It was Pentecost, after all. After 6 days in New Zealand, with a little time to ride bikes and sample some New Zealand wine, we headed to Melbourne, which is pronounced, I was told, Melbourne. A 4-hour flight and another conference in another uniting church. 3 more lectures and a workshop on the underground church and another group of amazing people. In Melbourne, I got together with 2 millennial pastors, yes, 2 30-somethings, Matt and Lucas, who are from my childhood tradition, the Churches of Christ. They have a podcast down under called Beyondering, a name given to convey their desire to think outside the box about church. And I recorded an hour-long session with them for their podcast to be broadcast to younger audiences, which apparently includes Gen Xers and even some baby boomers. Then it was off to Perth, all the way on the western coast, another 4-hour flight, because Australia is as big as the United States. And suddenly the sun was setting over the Indian Ocean, which we had never seen before. Perth is one of the most geographically isolated places on earth and has a kind of Midwestern feel to it. They made their money in iron ore. We stayed in a guest room on the campus of St. Catherine's College at the University of Western Australia, eating breakfast in the dining hall every morning with students, and students look the same everywhere, and then gathered for lectures at another uniting church with more feisty people. While in Perth, a UCC colleague, Hollis Wilson, who serves as chaplain in a private high school where girls and boys are separated, invited me to meet with 2 classes of students. First, a group of 10th and 11th grade girls who sat very politely as I talked about progressive Christianity until one of them asked me point blank, did I think Christ was coming back? And I said, well, who knows, but maybe once was enough. And she looked at me as if I was an alien. Then I headed across campus to meet with a group of 12th grade boys, so seniors at Christ Church Grammar School. They were in a philosophy class and were in the midst of a study of the life and thought of Albert Camus. They were all in their ties and their blazers, and I swore I had walked into a scene from Dead Poets Society. I'm Robin Meyers, I told them, not Robin Williams, and I promised not to jump up on the desk. Luckily, some of them had seen the movie and they thought that was pretty funny. But what followed was the most intense hour I have ever experienced, as these boys, who were obviously prepared to fire some big questions at the pastor from Oklahoma, opened with a kind of Q&A frenzy. If God is all-powerful, Reverend, and all-loving, then how do you explain the problem of evil? That's the question we started with. If you strip Jesus of all his supernatural elements, then how are you different from a humanist? Is progressive Christianity just another name for moral relativism? You know, small, insignificant questions like that. And they never stopped. The girls had slipped into the back of the room and mostly giggled while the boys mostly showed off. It was one of the most delightful hours of my life. By the end of it, the class was buzzing. A photographer had showed up to take some pictures, asked me if I minded them being posted on the school's Facebook page. Sure, why not? I imagine the caption was something like, Oklahoma pastor and professor meets his match in Mr. Dominic Hodgenet's philosophy class. And that night in chapel of Christ Church Grammar School, I gave the lecture Quantum Physics and the Future of God. So now they know all about the luminous web. Then it was off to Sydney, another 4-hour flight back across the country to that big, gritty city that reminded us more of New York. More lectures at Pitt Street Uniting Church, which was the first church to hold a Common Dreams event in 2007, and they're led by a remarkable pastor named Margaret Mayman. She and her partner Claire had us over for dinner and then took us out to see the outer banks of that remarkable harbor and perhaps the world's most beautiful opera house. Together with the woman she loved, we talked about the church's struggle with homosexuality and the fact that Australia still does not legally allow same-sex couples to wed. In so many ways, Australia is ahead of us. Single-payer health care, strict and effective gun control, and magnificent public spaces and botanical gardens. It is a society set up for more than automobiles. It has an amazing infrastructure for runners, bikers, and pedestrians. All I want around here are some sidewalks. And yet still no recognition that marriage can be a union between anyone other than one man and one woman. That remains in the Australian Constitution. I told the story of how many same-sex couples came here to marry on the night of the Supreme Court ruling, and that delighted our new friends down under. Lots of these people watch and listen to the sermons on the Mayflower website. At least one elderly man apparently watches a lot. He was a Methodist minister and obviously had something of a double crush on what he referred to as the amazing dark-haired duo here. The one with shorter hair that reads the text, who's that? I said that would be Sheridan Irick. And then the one with the longer hair that preaches, who's that? I said that's Lori Walke. Well, where do you find such remarkable women, he asked me at dinner. I said, they just wander in off the street. And speaking of Ms. Irick, she no longer just reads the text. I listened to her sermon in an airport in Auckland, and it would appear that yet another preaching star is born. Must be something in the water. While in Sydney, I got invited to do an interview about religion at the studios of ABC Australia, which is the NPR of Australia, with this religious guru and host named John Cleary. It will be broadcast nationally tonight, which is, of course, already tomorrow, along with a podcast and live stream, and it was fun to do this interview. Mr. Cleary is like the Terry Gross of religion down under, and we got all hooked up in the studio, and he said, now, before we start, pick 3 of your favorite songs, and we'll use them for the soundtrack. I wasn't prepared for this, so I said, okay. Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi, Fields of Gold by Sting, and Paul Simon's early song, The Only Living Boy in New York. It was a blast, and I'll see if we can get the link up on the website if you want to listen. In Sydney, I preached the sermon I preached here several weeks ago, Things Aren't the Same in Joppa These Days. Last but not least, we headed up the coast to Brisbane and did it all again. 3 more lectures and great conversation with fascinating people. By that time, we were starting to get seriously homesick, especially for the granddaughters. We knew all was well here, with Lori in charge and Glenda playing the piano and Kimberly directing the choir. Kimberly is very close, yes? She's about to have a child. And I've so much appreciated the way the choir has been an important presence in this time of transition. And Howard Sewell, he reads the text pretty well. He's got short, dark hair also. So we packed our suitcases one more time. We tucked ourselves back into those pods, and we fell asleep somewhere over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean on a 29-hour trip home. And we knew that a girl from Kansas had it exactly right. There's no place like home. Now, just one final word, which you've already heard before, but you're going to hear it again. You will never know how proud and grateful I am to travel and represent this church. I wonder if you sometimes forget how lucky we are to be doing as well as we are in a time of great stress and anxiety in the church. But this much is certain. You are a source of inspiration, quite literally, around the world. There are churches on the other side of the planet, people who look up in the sky at night and see the Southern Cross, who are now saying every single other. They are trying to build a viable church for the future, one that is biblically responsible, intellectually honest, emotionally satisfying, and socially significant. And they know it can be done because you are doing it. And they know enough about Oklahoma to know if it can be done here, it can be done anywhere. Oh, and one more thing. It's great to be home.